So hopefully this lecture is a little bit different to normal. So this is, I'm going to try and do a real world lecture as opposed to an academic lecture. And what I'm hoping to do is try and use a live example where SUVO, which was mentioned at the beginning, where I'm the managing director or president director in Indonesian speak, is already embarking on trying to commercialize an opportunity with Murdoch University in Australia, hence Professor Ander being here. But also we're very interested in some of the work that ITS is doing, and therefore we see an opportunity to potentially come and participate with ITS in the future. So that's going to be the premise for today. A couple of little warnings. I'm an excitable Bule or excitable Westerner, so I will probably start speaking very, very quickly. If I do start speaking too quickly, please, someone put their hand up and say, slow down, you're going way too fast, because I'm like that. I like it when it's interactive. So if you have questions as we're going through, please don't be shy to ask them, okay? I've lived in Indonesia a long time, or I did live in Indonesia for a long time. I know culturally, sometimes we feel awkward putting up our hand and wanting to ask a question. Please do so. You're going to get much more benefit out of asking me the questions than you are out of me just standing up here and talking. The other thing you'll find is I can't follow a presentation. So I'm going to walk around and talk, and hopefully it kind of loosely follows my slides. So maybe, is it up on here? Oh, there's a presentation that needs to, oh, there we go. Perfect. So let me, how do I click this so it goes up? Oh, there we go. Oh, perfect. Someone's already got it under control. Thank you. So look, I guess the first question is, maybe we can go to the first slide, is the first question is, if we can change the slide. There we go. So Hugh Thomas, why am I here? Okay, so it's always difficult putting a slide up about yourself, but here we go. As mentioned, you know, I'm the president director of and CEO of SUVO Strategic Minerals Limited. I'll explain why that's important to this lecture in a minute. I'm also a commissioner at a couple other mining companies in Australia. But previously, and probably more important for this lecture, is I used to be a banker, right? So I was a very senior banker at JP Morgan, based in Hong Kong, but I basically ran JP Morgan's natural resource practice for Asia, and I was the global head of research for JP Morgan. After my banking career, I actually moved to Indonesia. For those who might like the idea, my wife's actually Indonesian, so I met her at JP Morgan, and we came down here and I set up private equity funds with some ex-colleagues from JP Morgan, and so I basically was basically banking innovation. So people would come to us with clever ideas. We'd go, yes, we can help you. We'll write the check and develop it. And that was both in Indonesia and, in fact, for the benefit of Professor Andri, I actually did one in Malaysia as well with Axiata, the big telco company. And those products that we banked or we developed were across a wide gamut of things. We did IT stuff. So we were involved in the tap payment system in Jakarta on the buses. So we bankrolled that. One that wasn't very successful, but I'll admit it, was Barabanca, which was an online shopping and physical shopping thing. We funded that. We did a lot of work with Credit Plus, the largest independent credit provider in Indonesia. Actually, I was heavily involved in funding Pelindo 3 Port just down the road here, so I know Surabaya very well. I spent a long time here working with the government on funding that. I worked on Jokowi's maritime highway that he wanted to build with ferries from Medan down to across to Surabaya, actually, via Jakarta. And so hopefully I have a depth of experience that I can share with you from an Indonesian perspective as well as from an international perspective. I guess the reason I put two photos up there is the top photo is what you look like as a banker, And the bottom photo is all the worry you get when you have to actually try and work out how to do all these things. But basically you can see from the background there that hopefully I'm got some credibility in being able to talk to you today about how these things have happened. Now, a lot of the conversation is going to be around academia versus the commercial world. So to show that I have some empathy for academia, if you can put the next slide up, and this is a little bit of a joke. My father was a professor, so hopefully I can give you the academic perspective as well. And so my father was a professor of mining engineering in Australia at the University of New South Wales. I am delighted to say, if you look at the right-hand photo, that's from 1990, and proudly there's an Indonesian postgrad student working with him. So I grew up in an academic household. And the joke I have is that means I know that an academic can't give me a yes or no answer, right? It's impossible to get a yes or no answer from an academic. So my relationship with my father, I'd ask him a question and I'd say, Dad, yes or no, and he could never say it. It's always, oh, but we need to do this, or you need to look at that, or we need to carry on. So hopefully when I'm talking today, I'm sympathetic to the academic side and not just the wealth side or the commercialization side. So that was a bit of fun. So my father did a Ph.D. in rock mechanics, which is why when you dig a hole, it doesn't fall in on you. That's what his Ph.D. was on. So yeah, proudly an academic son, but I went down a different path. So academic commercialization, why is it so relevant today? Very, very simple in many ways. 50 years ago, large corporations had their own research labs. If you went to GE in America, or you went to BASF in Germany, or you went to Procter & Gamble, or even the big banks, they all had their own internal research departments. So they'd have their own labs, they've had their own technicians. Even if you look at many of the famous now IT stocks like Google and Facebook and all those things, they're the new generation. Where did they all spurn from? Where did they all come from? They actually came from students like you sitting around socializing and coming up with ideas. So what's happened is we've had this transition over the last 50 years where major organizations don't invest in their own research departments anymore. They've basically outsourced it to academia, right? So why are you all incredibly important to the commercial world? Because you're the ideas, right? Now, occasionally companies will come to universities and say, hey, we've got a problem. Can we fix it? Can you help fix it? But that, from the research that I've read, that's actually quite a small percentage of the academic rigor and the research rigor that goes on around the world. So at the end of the day, the vast majority of the cleverness, a lot of the IP, a lot of the concepts around processing, even organizational behavior on how to run companies better, come from places like MIT, Cambridge, Melbourne University and ITS. And so this whole relationship that needs to be developed between academia and the commercial world is incredibly important if you want to be, an innovator and a visionary, or even if you've got a traditional business like SUVO and you want to take it forward. And so, so that's why this is incredibly important. And so if we move to the next, oh no, actually don't. I'm going to give a little bit of a background story. It's the one note I made to myself this morning, and I don't need this anymore. Just before we go to the next part of the presentation, cynically, you could sit there and say, why am I here? Why have I come today, given up my time to come and talk to ITS? Yeah? And here's the reason why. And this is a real situation, but you can multiply this thousands of times around the world as we're speaking. So Mr. Aaron Banks, who's sitting down here in the black shirt this morning, is the chief commissioner or chairman of a company called SUVO Strategic Minerals Limited in Australia. He's also the major shareholder and in many ways the visionary of where SUVO is going. Aaron and I met 6 months ago. So I haven't been at SUVO long, about 6 months ago. And Aaron shared with me what he was trying to do and the frustrations of which he was having around how to move it forward, how to commercialize it. And this story is important because SUVO's traditional business is kaolin, right? Now, kaolin's a material which Indonesia's got lots of. It's got it all in Bangka Belitung and other deposits around the world, around the islands. But Bangka Belitung's the main area. Kaolin is a material that's used in a vast variety of applications. It goes into paper, it goes into ceramics, it goes into paint, it goes into pharmaceuticals, cosmetics, but we're always looking for what are the new applications of kaolin. And the fact that the vast majority of you here today, I understand, are from civil engineering or engineering, this is where it becomes relevant. One of the opportunities that Aaron had or could see was the use of kaolin in something called metakaolin. Right? Now, metakaolin, without wanting to get technical, because I'm not the chemistry guy, I'll keep this at a finance level. Metakaolin is like the super juice or the magic sprinkle you can put into the cement industry, whether that's traditional Portland cement or whether that's the newer geopolymer cements, which is where we're about to head in this conversation. And so he could see the opportunity. So we had kaolin, we had hydrous kaolin, which means we process it with water. And to make metakaolin, you basically calcinate the hydrous kaolin. And so Aaron and his team could see that opportunity. He could see that the world was going to reducing CO2s. He could see that metakaolin had a role in that. But in typical fashion, your mind races even further forward. And so what was the very interesting aspect that Aaron particularly picked up on was the ability to use metakaolin in geopolymer cement. And for those of you who haven't fallen under the incredible knowledge of Buyani here, geopolymer cement is basically making chemically based cement from aluminosilicate and high alkali products, so sodium hydroxide, sodium silicate. And that chemical process is much more beneficial from a CO2 perspective than traditional Portland cement. So we saw a wonderful marketing opportunity, or Aaron saw a wonderful marketing opportunity. So that's why I got involved. Aaron basically said, hey, I'd really like some help in running the organization because we can see this opportunity. Would you come and play to help see if the whole geopolymer cement basis works? So now, before moving to the next slide, again, cynically, why am I here today at ITS? Because believe it or not, within ITS, you have some of the cleverest people on the planet that I've found so far who know about geopolymer cement. So yes, it's nice that I'm doing a lecture and I'm happy to be here, but if you want from the commercial perspective of why I'm here, it's because there's knowledge in here that I would love, right? And so what have I done? I've come from the commercial world, I've crossed the abyss, I've come to the academic world to say, help me, right? Now we're doing that with Murdoch University, which is why Prof. Anders sitting at the front smiling. But he's got some great knowledge in certain aspects of geopolymer and we're working with them. Buyani and her team have knowledge in other areas which we're interested in, we're excited about. Now, who knows what will happen? That's what this whole lecture is about. Who knows? But I'd love to think that down the track, I'm here more often, more than happy to come and lecture because we've developed a relationship with ITS around commercialization of aspects of geopolymer cement. So that's the backstory for kind of why I'm here today. So if we can flick to the next slide, if we can, which hopefully it comes up so I can then start speaking. So because I'll need to jot myself what I'm supposed to say next. There we go. Okay. So I thought it would be very helpful just at the beginning, and this is a little bit more for the lecturers and the administrative staff and the students, but I thought it was worth just covering the traditional models that academia have used for commercialization, right? And so what we've got, I've tried to represent it on a kind of simplistic graph, is, you know, the three approaches which currently exist in the world for universities to commercialize things. Number one, basically some universities have gone to a full in-house model. And what I mean by that is within the university itself, they have innovation parks, they have industry working with them, and it is part of, inextricably linked with the university. Right? And they've been incredibly successful, some of them. I'll talk about it. As you can imagine, the leading universities of the world, with no disrespect to my alumni or ITS, the leading universities of the world have gone down this model, whether that's Cambridge University, whether that's MIT, whether that's Stanford. Very early on, in fact, back in the 70s, they realized that transition from the corporate world unwinding their labs to the universities taking over was happening. And so they were very, very innovative in terms of setting up industrial parks or innovation parks within their campuses. I will do one slide on that after this just to say how successful it can be. The next level down, and basically number two is where the vast majority of universities in the world probably sit, which is they've got technology transfer officers or TTOs. So the university comes up, so academia, students come up with IP or intellectual property, whether that's around formulation or process or whatever. So as engineering students, you've got IP in clever formulations you might have around, say, the cement industry, and I'll keep using it as the example as I go through. But it might be clever IP around how you mix or process that. It might be clever ideas around how you cast it. The IP can be around all sorts of different elements. So universities set up TTO offices and they've got commercialization staff. Now, I have to be a little bit careful, so I'm not now talking about ITS. I'm just talking about this as a general model. On the whole, those officers have not necessarily been fantastic. Right? Firstly, there's always this conflict between what the university wants and what the academic who's created the IP wants. And that's a difficult bridge to have to think. And it also comes down to the individual, the academic. Some academics are purely just researchers and want to be researchers for life, and that's what they love. Others have a more entrepreneurial flair to them and actually like the concept of money. And therefore, they want to go down a different path than being the purest researcher academic. Now, interestingly, I'll do three first and then come back and make a comment again. So, and then some universities have no TTO officers, they have no commercialization people, but there are wonderful examples where there's still been very, very successful commercialization. But that has come because of the quality of the academic or the quality of the researcher. It comes down to their personality. I'll be careful. I'm sorry, I'm in Indonesia. So they've made an effort. I was going to use an Australianism. They got off their hands. They made an effort to actually go out there and commercialise. And without being horrid to Murdoch University, Martin's the only one there today, although if there's administrators from Murdoch watching online, sorry. We didn't get involved with Murdoch University because a TTO officer came from Murdoch University to SUVO and say, hey, we've got this thing called geopolymer cement, we need some help with it. We got involved with Murdoch University because Professor Ander came to us via some circuitous route. I have no idea what the true background story is, but he managed to get involved with SUVO and we liked the idea. So it actually wasn't two that got us involved with Murdoch University. It was three. And to be honest, the whole reason I'm here today at ITS is actually three and not two. Because through Martin's connections with Buyani, I was introduced to ITS a month ago when I was up here before. And it's that has resulted in me now understanding how advanced ITS is in geopolymer and why I'm here today. So whilst it's an incredible joy to provide the lecture to you, it was also lovely to have further conversations with Buyani and her colleagues about what the university can do around geopolymer. Just quickly on two. There was a recent, because I'd like to be an academic, but I'm not, I did do some literary research on this point. And so point two, in America, and so therefore it's got a Western bias, which we have to be careful of. But in America, they did a survey over the last 20 years of 178 universities around commercialization of IP and the value the universities got from that commercialization. And to cut a long story short, the conclusions from the literary research and the additional empirical work that they did was the universities were only getting about 16% the value of the IP, and the rest was going to industry. Only 16%. Now, from a commercialization perspective, I love that number, right? Because that means I'm greedy and I'm getting 84% of the benefit. From a university number, you should be worried. Because imagine when I put some numbers up in a minute of how much that value of that was. So here, that study concluded, and if people get interested, please WhatsApp me at the end and I can forward the literary research material to you. But what was very fascinating about it is in America, the study was from 2 years ago. So in 2021, which was a COVID year, so not a great year, the universities received from their IP patents, those surveyed, not all the universities, those surveyed, received $9.1 billion worth of benefit. But that was for 16%. All of you are engineering students, so you can take 16% and divide it through and work 9.1 and work out how much the size and the value was to the commercialization side. Right? So academia and business working together, there's a history, but is the relationship right yet? Okay. If we go to the next slide, it's worth looking at Cambridge University. Now, this is the Rolls Royce. This is the ultimate example of university, academia, and private enterprise or commercialization working together. University, what was called the Cambridge cluster. So, and it's around Cambridge, the town in the UK. It began in 1960 when when they formed Cambridge Consultants. So basically a group of clever academics got together at Cambridge and said, you know what, we're one of the best universities in the world. Why aren't we leveraging our knowledge? Why aren't we leveraging our skills? 1960, they started this. By 1970, one college at Cambridge University, obviously a famous one and a reasonably well-funded one, Trinity College, been around for 1,000 years almost, turned around and said, you know what, we're so keen on this, we're going to build an innovation centre at Cambridge University. So they made the investment. Again, so I don't talk for too long, because I will, it's worth spending a little bit of time on it, because now that Cambridge cluster, driven by a university, innovated by a university, now working with industry, has 26,000 companies working in that innovation part. Their turnover, and I'm sorry it's in pounds, but is 48 billion pounds. So I can't do the number of noughts in repair because it just gets too many. But that's about 65 billion US dollars. Yeah. So we're talking trillions and trillions of rupiah. It employs 227,000 people. So what's the population of Surabaya? 3 million, roughly? 2 million. So they've now got an innovation park with 10% the population of Surabaya working there, purely because it's an academic commercial relationship that's working. You can read the rest of the statistics. The one that I didn't put up there because I found it too late was Cambridge University, the value of the innovation that they hold, either directly or through the investments in the companies that they have in that innovation park, is over 50 billion pounds. right? Which is about 70 billion US dollars of value that they own, that the university, Cambridge University, owns. Okay, it's taken them some time, but they were visionary. And so the important part just for this was to go through the models and say, okay, Cambridge is the best case. It's the number one in terms of having done this. MIT is not far behind. Stanford's not far behind. But what I would say to you students, nag your administrators and say, hey, we should be trying this stuff. Because if you can create this, your path and your joy to having wonderful academic lives where you know that the work you do gets valued not just because you've written your paper to satisfy your Ph.D. or to hold your position, but because you've actually got contribution, which is fast and sound and demonstrable, right? That's the dream model for every university I would suggest to you around the world. If we go to the next slide. Okay, let me get on to the bit that I love the most. Academics and commercial people have different mindsets. Right? This is very, very important to understand. So what I've tried to do here is joke and say, obviously the hand overreaching from the top is academia, and there I am begging with my money to say, please, can I help you? Yep. And I had to show that I had a maths background, so I've got the correlation coefficient statistic up there to basically say, how often do these two things correlate? Yeah. And sadly, not as often as we would like is the answer. And so understanding these divergent interests becomes very, very important to being able to be successful for both parties, whether that's for academia or whether that's for us to be able to commercialize things successfully. So let me use an example I used last night at a dinner, and the guilty parties are sitting down here, so who can attest to it. From an academic perspective, I'm very, geopolymer cement is around finding that perfect formula. What's that perfect way of making geopolymer cement? So, Professor Yanni, I was going to call you Martin, Professor Ann, and Professor Andre, who's going to talk later. Their dream, and I'm being presumptuous, but their dream is coming up with the geopolymer formula on the planet. That's what they want to do. They want to find the best of everything and put it in there. When they go to bed at night, the thing that excites them is, oh my gosh, we've worked out how to use metakaolin better, or we've worked out how to find some new input to make that geopolymer cement even stronger, or we found a way to accelerate how it sets. And I get that. And I get that's their motivation, and I get that that's what they dream about. As a commercialization guy, I hate to tell you, I don't dream about that stuff, right? I'm delighted that they do, but that's not what gets me going. Because at the end of the day, being a commercialization guy is around, can I sell it, right? That's what I think about. Can I make money out of it? Can I sell it? So my view is, oh my gosh, I've got to be able to sell this stuff. Their view is, how do I make it perfect, right? Now, the trouble is, and this is why I wanted to give you the backstory about SUVO and the fact that we're interested in geopolymer cement. I know if I asked each of the three distinguished professors down at the front here what was the best mix for geopolymer cement, even now they wouldn't agree. Right? So I got three different answers to a very simple question. Give me the best formula, right? They won't agree. And their research is all going down slightly different paths to come up with the perfect solution. Right? From the commercialization point of view, I'm not interested in that. I'm delighted they're doing it, as I said, but I'm not interested. What I'm interested is, can you come up with a formula where there's enough of everything, the inputs for sodium silicate, the sodium hydroxide, the alumina silicate base that we're using, whether that's fly ash or GGBS or nickel slag, red mud from bauxite. What I'm interested about is there enough of those raw materials that I can create a business that's going to run for 20 or 30 years. So I don't need the world's best geopolymer formula. I need the formula which has sufficient robustness that on a commercialization basis, I know there's enough raw materials around to be able to change the world for good. So we both have that interest of wanting to develop geopolymer. We both want to reduce CO2 emissions. We both believe that the traditional cement industry, which is the single largest CO2 emitter in the world as an industry, needs to be changed. Their desire is perfection on formulation. My desire, Aaron's desire, SUVO's desire, other commercialization companies' desire is, can I make $1 out of this to help? And this is why understanding the difference in the mindsets is very, very important for establishing the long-term working relationships that need to exist between academia and those of us who commercialize. So if we go to the next slide, please. So here we go. I think I probably just covered this off. Academia wants perfection. 40 years of being a banker, working in industry, all it tells me, I can do all the spreadsheets, I can work the numbers out, I can identify the market. My life is really, really, really simple at the end of the day. It comes down to two things from a commercialization perspective. Can I sell it? And can I make $1 out of it? That's all I worry about. That's simple. For all the cleverness around the banking world, for all the cleverness around the kids doing finance degrees and your colleagues doing finance degrees, up late at night studying working average cost of capital and DCFs and MPVs and all those things, at the end of the day, it comes down to one question and one question only. Can I sell it? So for all the IP that gets invented in the world, for all the clever ideas that university generates, I'm going to say it again. It's really simple for me. Can I sell it? That's what commercialization is all about. Now, having probably done myself an amazing disservice and saying it is that simple, it then comes down to how does that relationship have to work so we can give ourselves the best chance of success. So if we can flick to the next slide, if we may. Right. Oh, this one's a bit busy. To give yourself the best chance of success, generally you need focus and discipline and an understanding of each other's worlds. I'm sure these slides will get distributed at the end, so I'm sorry that this is a bit of a busy slide and a bit small for the text. But what I was trying to do is when we look at commercialization, there's kind of two parts to it, right? There's the academic readiness, as I've called it, and then there's the commercial readiness. Now, the academic readiness, I hope most of you are familiar with or getting familiar with, and certainly the TTO office here and things should be ready with, which is, from an academic perspective, you go through these steps. You basically go through, and I'll move over here because I've got my wrong glasses on to be able to read clearly. Have basic principles been observed? Are formulations on concept application, proof of concept, validation in lab, validation in relative environments? These are the processes that the academia go through to get to their end. You can actually see where we dovetail in. So commercial is green here. That wasn't to represent us being good or for the US dollar. It just happened to go nicely with the blue, but we have a green here and we will get involved early, right? In many cases, SUVO in relation to geopolymer cement has come in early. So we can see a hypothetical commercial proposition. And we can see it clearly enough that we're prepared to take that risk and come up here and start having the conversations. We want to be involved early. And then you can see as the academic process goes through, where you get to kind of systems being complete and qualified, you've done tests and demos, you've got actual system operations, full range of conditions, And so, for example, with our geopolymer cement, when we say full range of conditions from the academic perspective, it might be, does it work at 100 degrees Celsius and does it work at minus 100 degrees Celsius, because it may get used in Saudi Arabia, it may get used in Mongolia. So have we tested everything? So from the commercial perspective, we then start dovetailing very, very nicely. We start doing our commercial trials, we'll start doing it on a small scale. You know, we'll scale the commercial stuff up. So CR3, CR4, we want to see multiple commercial applications to make sure it can work. CR5, you know, wide spread development and market competition. And then really what we're looking for, and CR6 is the reason I used to get paid a lot of dollars at JP Morgan as opposed to standing here now. They would very much call it, in beautiful terminology, has it become a bankable asset class? Simplistically, can I sell it, and can I sell it for $1? That's just for the textbook terms for it. So before moving on, it's important to get academia to understand that kind of framework over the top. Now, most of you do academia normally does. You're quite process driven. You've got that discipline, especially in engineering sciences, where it's, you know, it's a numeric based discipline. You're very good at drawing up those plans and those flow charts and making it work. When it comes to so that bit you've got down pat. Generally, what happens is, for example, with CR1 from the commercialization point of view, we're basically doing it at a desktop. So we're in, but we're not spending a lot of money on it yet, right? So I'm happy to come to Surabaya, I'm happy to have the conversations, but I'm not building labs yet, and I'm not saying, you know, here's $1 million, guys, go off and look at this or do this. But I'm emotionally engaged with the concept, and I think it's got work. It's got potential. So we, you know, again, because it's all about money for us, CR1 is a small amount of money. And as we go through each box, you can imagine that our investment's going up and up and up as we de-risk the commercialization parameters. And again, I've got some slides on that going forward. Now, there is something which everyone has to understand from the finance world. And it's one that they don't teach you in the textbooks, and I guarantee they won't be teaching here, even at a master's level in finance or whatever. Old cynical bankers like me joke about the golden rule of finance. Right? And as I said, this is never taught, sadly. It should be taught on day one, but it's not. And the golden rule of finance is, sadly, he who has the gold makes the rules. Right? So, and that, sadly, in the real world is how it works. If you need money, you've got to convince someone to give it to you. And generally, the person who holds the money has choice. So as a banker, I've got 50 opportunities, or as a venture capitalist, as a private equity fund, I've got 50 opportunities coming to me every day to say, pick me, pick me, pick me. So generally that means if I do pick you, it's on my terms because I've got choice. And this becomes important for some of the almost psychological elements that we're going to discuss moving forward. So if we can go to, again, the next slide, if you'd be so kind. Okay. I've kind of covered this, but I wanted people to admire my ability to find icons on PowerPoint to do this. So a current example, SUVO Strategic Minerals Limited, an Australian public company, which I've covered, is working with Murdoch University on geopolymer cement and its commercialisation. And as I said, part of being here today is we actually think there's potentially a role for ITS to be involved in that as well. So we both have a common goal. Make me personalise it. There's Martin and arguably the other two professors into geopolymer, and anyone else in here who, you know, we've got some of, you know, master students and PhD students who are getting into geopolymer. There you are, sitting back, dreaming away. You can see the stars, and I managed to superimpose some conical flasks on there. That's you guys dreaming away. Wow, we're going to make the perfect geopolymer cement. So your goal is, oh my gosh, how are we going to make it? As I said, Aaron and I's goal, anyone else in commercialization, we're sitting there going, oh, we can see the dollars. This one's a good one. How do we get the common theme? How do we get to work that together? Because as I said, the perfect geopolymer binder is not necessarily the easiest one to commercialize. It might be the third best geopolymer binder is the easiest one to commercialize because of availability of materials or the cost of the inputs or whatever. So how do we make sure that the academic world's striving for perfection is aligned with the commercialization world of having to make a return on our investment or having to make $1 or a repair? So I think we've covered that one off a fair bit anyway. So can we flick to next slide? Right, the commercialization mindset. Now, let me just say, there is a section of commercialization which I'm not covering today, and that's the philanthropic side of commercialization. That's where someone, for reasons other than commercial motivation, are helping develop something because they see it from an altruistic perspective. They go, I will pay, like it's like Bill Gates with his malaria vaccine through Africa. He hasn't done it for money. He's done it because he truly believes that's something that he has the luxury of doing as a wealthy man to help the world. So my discussion kind of excludes those people who are commercializing for philanthropic grounds or for because of our faith, it's almost like it's zakat money as opposed to commercialization money. Right? So simplistically, it is all about the money from the commercial mindset, as I said. We do go through a rigorous process. As much as I've said it's about the money, I assure you, we go through very, very rigorous processes to do it. And depending on the complexity, it can be quite quick. It can be 3 to 6 months, or it can be years for us to come up with those ideas. So you imagine if it's going to take years, what do you think the single most important factor is for us to be successful over that period? The single most successful factor is, can we all work well together? Do we understand the roles and responsibilities that we all carry in trying to commercialize this opportunity? So if we can flick to the next slide. Right, I deliberately made this slide as busy as I could because I don't want you to read it. This is just to say, when we go through a commercialization process as a banker, of course, we go through, things. We look at how are we going to produce it? How are we going to distribute it? How are we going to market it? How are we going to sell it? What's the customer support? We do all the stuff on capital structures, working average cost of capital, DCF models, NPV models, internal rate of return. So, like many of you here, I did my undergraduate degree, I did my postgrad, and went Excel spreadsheets and doing market studies and all those kind of things. So we do go through a rigorous process around that, will something work or not? However,
ada di kelas.
go to the next slide.
Ya itulah yang diindekin.
Is the truth. And this is the stuff you won't learn at university unless you have people guest lecture and come along and tell you. From my perspective, and it is from my perspective, there would be people who don't agree with me, but they probably are still bankers justifying their existence. My personal view is it's never about the numbers. When we do all the work, when we do all our DCFs and MPVs and market studies on commercializing something, it either works or it doesn't work. Or if I try and joke about the Surabayan culture, which is, I always love when I'm here, but it's either can or cannot, right? It's either I can or I cannot. So when it comes to the financial analysis, the depth of the market, is the opportunity really going to work or not? We can come up with an answer that says, yes, it will work or it won't. But then we get to the real issue, in my view. And the real issue is, have we got the right people to take this forward? Okay? It's not about the numbers. They have to be done. We have to prove that it can be commercial. But it's about, have we got the right people to be able to carry this forward to make it work. So from my perspective, I look for the right academic team. From your perspective, you should be looking for the people you're talking to who've got the money. Do you feel right with them? Is that relationship going to be right? And it's two-way. It's not me going, can I work with academia? It should be the academics and the TTO officers and those things should be saying, oh my gosh, have we spoken to enough people with money to make sure we've picked the one that we feel comfortable with, the one that we think we can work with and move forward with? So the people issue is, in my view, the single most important part of commercialisation. So if I personalise it again with the SUVO situation, can Aaron as the chairman, myself as the managing director of SUVO, can our board, can our employees work with the Murdoch University team successfully? Can we do that? Should we move further forward, and we hope it does, can we work with the ITS team to make it work? But simultaneously, you should be saying to yourselves, the universities, oh my gosh, are Hugh and Aaron the right guys? Do we feel comfortable with them? Or should we be looking for someone else with a different source of money? Now, we'd like to think that we're wonderful guys and we're great, but you know, there may be people out there who might be a better match on certain applications than we are. And we will have to be realistic about that, because at the end of the day, success is built around the relationships that you have to develop to move a business forward. Right? It's like marriage. Right? It's not perfect all the time, but if you work hard at it, you can make it wonderfully successful. Right? So from our perspective, going back to the commercialisation perspective, we talk about risk. So beta in the finance world is risk. So all our life is driven around what are the risks associated with moving this forward and commercialising. So if we can move forward again to the next slide. Here we go. So there's two parts to it. When we're commercialising opportunities from academia, which is different to commercialising, slightly different to commercialising things from the private sector, there's kind of two broad options. One is the IP already exists. So academia has basically delivered us a box with a bow around it because you've done the IP, it all works, and all we're doing is basically, in many ways, almost buying that IP from you or taking it, and then we don't have any more involvement with the university. Oh my gosh, that one's so good. It's easy. I don't have to deal with any of you. I buy it, I move on, I do what I like with it. I bought the IP. The reality is that's a very, very small number of cases. So the likelihood that you just deliver me a product and it's a one-off experience, I shake your hand and I say, thank you very much for your hard work, here's the money, and then I walk away with it. That's a very, very small number of times that happens. Really what it comes down to is I'm not buying a one-off product. I'm buying a relationship. I'm buying the need to have to work with a group of people for a period of time, maybe for 10 years, maybe longer, to commercialize something to be successful. So the reality is that the universities are delivering me a relationship opportunity, and my job is make sure that ongoing relationship works, right? And academia with universities is on unique challenges to that, which I will go through. But basically, the top one is once I've done my due diligence, as it's called, there's no ongoing relationship, and I walk away, and it's very easy for me. The second one is I have to be I need to have collaborative development. I need for an ongoing relationship, potentially over multiple years. And so really the next bit of what I'm going to say is all around how do we give ourselves the best chance to make sure that that bottom box works. Right? So if we can flick to the next slide. Right, here we go. The uniqueness of dealing with academia. Okay. So we talked about earlier, you know, that there were three phases or three models which are basically used around the world for commercialization. You know, we used Cambridge example as a thing. So when someone like SUVO or when Hugh Thomas, an individual, knows that they're going to have to get involved with academia to move forward, there are 3 levels that I actually have to deal with. Not 1, but 3. The first one is I called it the architect. That's probably not the best word. But someone in here has come up with a clever idea. Someone's come up with geopolymer cement. Someone's come up with new vaccines. Someone's come up with a new IT application. Someone's come up with something clever and new, and I need to have a relationship with that person. So correct me if I'm wrong or I'm embarrassing you, Puyani, but you know, you're geopolymer. So we want a relationship with you as the geopolymer person. But then it comes with a team. So I've now got a new dynamic that I have to manage as a commercialization person. I'm not just dealing with you as an individual or you. I'm dealing with the collective. And as soon as I've got a team, oh my gosh, it multiplies. It's almost exponentially difficult because I've now got different personalities I have to satisfy. I've got different HR issues that pop up. I've got different motivations. I've got people who want to be the academic researchers striving for perfection and they're not worried about money. And then I've got other academics who turn around and start buying brochures on new cars and new houses because they think they're going to get rich. And I've got to manage all of that stuff, right? And so that's it. And then I get, with all due respect to the administrators in here, in many ways, the worst of the worst. I've got to deal with the university. Sorry, but I've got to deal with the university. So not only I've got the clever person at the top and I've got the emotional buy-in, I've built that relationship. That's fantastic. I've now met the team and I think, yeah, you know, and I'll use Puck Prof Anders, I'll call you Puck Martin Bugger. So I've met Martin's team. He knows this, so I can say it. And if any of them are listening, you can work it out yourself. There's a normal distribution of human behavior in there. There's guys in there I know are going to be great, and there's guys in there I know are going to have to manage more than some of the others. That's just natural. When you get a group of people in a room, there's that distribution, and I know that. And we've had these conversations because why? Because I believe that the way to success is through collaborative effort. So I know I've got to manage some people more than others. You know, because I'm old, I can joke about with the millennials. I know I've got to hug them on a much more frequent basis than someone who's older, who I can say, come on, get real. You know, you can't do that with a lot of your Western, particularly younger generation. I have to hug them and hold them and say, it's all going to be okay and we'll look after you. So we've got to manage and balance up these things. So any millennials listening on the webcam, please don't be like that because it's just too much hard work. And then, as I said, we have to deal with the university. Now, remember, the university's motivation is different to the architect's motivation. The architects come up with a clever idea and they either want to perfect that idea, so they need money, or they want to commercialize that idea for their own personal gain. Both are fully legitimate models. Right? To do that, they generally have to bring a team with them because they know who they need to help them do it. You know, you need your Ph.D. students or your master students. But their motivation quite often can be different to the university's motivation. And this is why I even mentioned at the beginning, an academic and a university are already in conflict on day one, and they have to work that out. So what's the university's cut? What's the university delivering to me? Generally, it's bureaucracy, it's forms that I have to fill in, it's government policy that I have to navigate. Oh my God, it drives me nuts. And I'm doing this just because at the end of the day, I've got what I need at the top of the knowledge and I've got the money, but oh my God, I've got to jump through all these hoops. So my message to the universities is make my life easy. Right? And how do you make it easy? Let's sit down and talk. Let's work this out at the beginning of the process. Some innovations don't make any money and you lose your money, right? Hopefully that doesn't happen very often. Some make an absolute fortune. So all of a sudden, the university sees some academic now being flown around the world, living a good lifestyle, and the university goes, well, wait a minute, where's our bit? Why aren't I getting some of that? Or why did I get it so wrong in the early negotiation? And I'll go, but wait a minute, we've got a contract that says you get this and they get that. Oh, no, but now that person's got a better life or doing this. It's a nightmare for us, right? Now, that doesn't discourage us from doing it. I'm here and I want to have a relationship. I've got a relationship with Murdoch. I potentially want a relationship with ITS. But the university, let's be very conscious of the fact that we need to work out how to work successfully together. Because the sad reality is, other than the model that I put up before about Cambridge University or about the Cambridge cluster and some of those larger, wealthier institutions like MIT and Stanford, the vast majority of IP commercializations I have done, and it is a large number both in Indonesia and overseas, and a lot of them have been done with universities. My biggest, the irony is the vast majority of what I've done is I've met the individual first. I haven't met the university. So Martin, I met first. I had met lots of meetings with him before I ever met Murdoch University. Right? Martin introduced me to Buyani. So I met Buyani the day that I came out was the first time I met her, and I met the rest of ITS because nicely you'd taken it seriously and there was a group of people there. But at the end of the day, it's come through personal relationship. So the conflict that happens is basically the primary relationship I formed is the one with the person who's got the focus and the drive and come and spoken to me, right? The universities are very bad at going marketing IP. The vast majority of them come because one of the academics has spoken at a conference and I've heard about it and I go, wow, that's interesting. How do I get to meet that person? And you know what? I go, I don't want to meet MIT. I don't want to meet Stanford. I don't want to meet Cambridge. I don't want to meet Murdoch University. I don't want to meet ITS. Who do I want to meet? I want to meet the person. Because at the end of the day, it's a personal relationship. So what we need to do to make the university one is we need to make sure that relationship becomes personal as well, and not this amorphous bureaucracy that I have to deal with as part of a commercialization process. Because more of the ones have failed that I've been involved in because of the university than ever because of me dealing with the person or the team. The university either doesn't get it, doesn't want to allow the academic the freedom. So here's an interesting thing, and I'm sure this will be the case to ITS. So if it's not, someone stand up and apologise straight away, and I'll apologise straight away. But most universities restrict the amount of work an academic can do on commercialisation of ideas. Most universities restrict it, right? And they restrict it because they say to the academic, oh, you've got to produce your 5 research papers and you've got to do this many lecturing hours and blah, blah, blah. And yet, the people in those roles are clever people. They're professors, they're doctorates, they're intelligent human beings. So if you went back to that first slide, which had box number 1, Cambridge University places absolutely no restrictions on academics' ability to do commercial activity. Absolutely no restrictions. And do you know what? Their research says they produce more papers, they're more involved for their students, so they do not restrict or encumber their academics. Now that's breakthrough stuff, because universities around the world, even the prestigious universities in Australia, so like Melbourne University, which has now just been ranked number 12 in the world, which is a phenomenal achievement, principally around the quality of their research, still restricts their academics on how much time they can spend outside what would be called traditional academia. Face-to-face hours lecturing, writing the research papers, giving a paper here or there. Now, I'm not advocating that that model should change immediately, but I'm advocating that as the world moves forward and that relationship between academia and the commercial world moves forward, that is a policy discussion that needs to be had at every university around the world. How do we make sure... Oh, 15 minutes. Okay. I knew this would happen. So the breakthrough question there is how do we do that? Okay. So let's flick on to the next slide then. I can wrap this up pretty quickly. And I'd rather have a lot of questions than things. So next slide. Okay. I've deliberately referenced some academic papers here, so if I can go through this slide quickly. If you get interested, read this paper. It's an absolute cracker on on what I would call, right? I probably covered this in many ways. This was me starting to try and summarize what's so important. Academic engagement, and I've stolen it from a paper, can be defined as a knowledge-related collaboration between academic research with non-academic organisations, right? So this all comes down to that human element again. How can I make sure that the academic community is engaged on what they're trying to do, aligned with my interests as well as their interests? Okay. So covering it from my perspective, reading the last sentence of the quote, when collaborating with the best academic researchers, firms, as in the corporate world, need to take into account that these academics will, under most circumstances, only work with them if there was also some academic benefit derived. So there was a lot of research done that said the best relationships between academia and the private sector allowed those academics to continue their research, to continue their academic lifestyle. So when I pair that with a comment I just made earlier on the first slide about universities wanting to restrict academic availability of time for commercialization and other aspects, the smart money, the smart companies that you want to get involved with commercialization will understand that the whole reason you're in academia is the fact that you do get your joy out of that path. That's the path that you went down, whether that was, the reason you're in academia today is because you choose to be in it. Yep. So I've got to reflect that that's your driver, that's your motivator. You want to continue to do your research, which is why Cambridge and other empirical studies around models on restricting academic work in commercialization has actually shown that if you get the right partners, universities, you don't have to stress. You'll get your research papers. You'll get better quality research coming out because we understand the need for the academics to continue to do that work. So with geopolymer and with SUVO, we're having discussions around, commercialization of a first concept. But don't get me wrong, all of the people we've discussed with, and in fact, I'll use some information that it came out with Buyani and Martin yesterday, is when we talked about commercialization of the geopolymer cement, we didn't talk about the first product. We were globally dominating the world. We had book 2 written, book 3 written, book 4 written on the application of geopolymer cement. And guess what? That's very important because the questions we were asking from a commercialization perspective is, what's the next product? What's the next way we can use this? So if I'm very, very simple, all of you buy washing powder to clean your clothes. Actually, it's Indonesia, so a lot of you, your helpers will do that for you. But you've got your washing powder, and have you ever noticed that you'll go and buy the simple Procter & Gamble product, and then a year or two later, it'll be the new one, and it's got enzyme in it or something. And then the next one's got extra fabric softener, and the next one's got this and this. So they're taking that product and they're building it up and building it up to extend its life. The analogy that I would draw when I'm using geopolymer cement is we've got product A, which we can see is the simplest to commercialize, but it's not the end game. The end game is book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. And the bottom line is we don't have the answers yet for how to do book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. So why do I want the relationship with academia? Because I want book 2, book 3, book 4, book 5. That's what this is about. It's developing that relationship. So when SUVO or any other enlightened commercial organization gets involved with academia, it's not about the one-off. It's about developing that relationship to get the next book, the next book, the next book. And in fact, when we started the conversation, we started talking about chapters, and I'm going, no, it's not chapters in a book. It's a whole new book. It's like Harry Potter, right? You read book 1, it's got lots of chapters in, but then we want book 2, and we want book 3, and we want book 4. Yeah. So getting the right relationship when you merge academia and the commercial world together is making sure you're going to write that series of books. And to write that series of books, the commercial world needs to allow academia to do the research, to publish the papers. So, guys, the only thing I ask you to take away as the kind of conclusion from this today, from a theoretical perspective, before I have 7 minutes to go through my final bullet points, is that collaboration, and that from the academic perspective and from the commercial perspective, ultimately are aligned. I don't want you to stop being academics. I want you to research. I want you to write your papers, because if you do that, I get book 2, I get book 3, I get book 4. So administrators, when I said, you know, Cambridge and MIT have discovered that restricting academic behavior doesn't actually help the situation, believe it, because if we have that collaborative relationship where you provide the opportunity to academics to work out that balance themselves, the empirical evidence says from the higher quality universities around the world, it will work. You'll get your research, you'll get your money, you'll get your papers, because it's in my interest as much as it's in your interest. I know I only get Martin half the time from a commercialization, because his mind's off there on other stuff all the time. He wants to go and, you know, dominate the world on something else. So that collaborative understanding becomes very important. Parties need to understand each other's goals, but we can't restrict the way in which we achieve those goals, in my view. So if we go to the very, I think it's the very last slide from memory. Right. So there's a lot on this slide, and everyone will tell you in presentations you shouldn't put a lot of notes on the slide. This is just me saying, when I'm talking to people, when I'm looking for commercialization partners, what do I look for? And to be candid, this was probably the hardest slide I've done, because I've never had to sit down and go, what is it I really do look for? I just go out there and I talk to people, and it either feels right or wrong to me. And then you actually have to try and write that down and distill that. It's actually quite difficult. But, you know, obviously I want to draw on the right minds. I want to find things. So Martin was kind enough to say, hey, wow, there's these guys at ITS. You should go and have a talk to. What am I doing? I'm drawing on the right minds. So I've got someone who's an expert in the profession, or sorry, not in the profession, that's my world, in academia, saying, hey, meet some other academics who are really good at this stuff as well. I'm drawing on the right minds, right? The other thing that's important to me is I'm garnering ideas from all ranks and positions. So guess what? I don't just want to talk to Martin. I want to talk to his team. I want to talk to Jared and Ramon and all the guys he's got there. I've already had the pleasure of, when talking to Buyani, to talk to one of her master's students and hopeful PhD student already, to get his ideas as well. It's not just about talking to the architect, it's about talking to that team. I want the ideas from everyone. So when you're a junior and you're in that meeting, and you think you've got something clever to say, please speak up. I know culturally it's very difficult sometimes, but be brave and speak up, because from a commercialization world, I want everyone having their say, because you might just have the clever thought that none of the rest of us have come up with. Evidence of encouraging and enabling collaboration. Well, people who've come to me have already demonstrated that. Right? If I go to university, they go, oh, we'll introduce you to so-and-so. But those academics who've shown the drive and shown the attitude to want to actually act on what they're doing, I already know I've got that. I've already got evidence of them wanting to be involved in something. So they're people I like immediately and straight away. Openness to diverse perspectives, right? You've got to sit in a room and not just be that channeled to say things. This goes back to almost that argument about academic perfection versus commercialization. We've got to have that diverse sense of perspectives to make it work. ability to articulate process and bring functioning out. Now, one of the troubles that we have with the academic world, and the academic world has with commercialisation, is we don't speak the same language, right? And I've had a laugh straight away from Martin, right? So that ability to articulate process and map out phases of creativity become very, very important, because we do think differently. Our training makes us think differently. And it's very hard sometimes to get an academic to say, no, I need you to talk about this little box, not all of this. I'll go back and joke about my father. He can't say yes or no to me. It's always, yes, Hugh, but you have to understand. No, I just need a yes or no answer. But if we did this, no. Does it work or doesn't it work? Well, under these circumstances, no, Dad, tell me yes or no. And I've personalized that because and I'm very lucky. My father's turns 93 in a week and he's still alive and very healthy, still got a great mind. But I know when I go and see him in 2 weeks' time, I won't get a yes or no on the whole day that I spend with him. It'll always turn into something else. Academia, I love it. So that ability to narrow it down, to talk about a phase or a part of a process, academics find difficult, right? But from our perspective, it's what it's all about. How do I define this bit? How do I define this bit? How do I do that? So building that relationship becomes very important. Right. I'll have the joke on academia's ability to assist with the path through bureaucracy. Oh my God. If I'm dealing with academics who know how to help me with the bureaucratic system of the university, that's a godsend to me. So, anyway, what I want to do is continue to fan the flames of motivation and creativity. This goes back to my argument. I don't want to restrict academic research. I don't want to restrict innovation just because I'm trying to commercialize one idea, because it's never about the one story, it's about the books. Right? Obviously, we want to create an environment that provides that intellectual challenge. Otherwise, you're academics. You like to go and explore. You like to have your views. You like to go and explore. So the last thing I want to do is try and restrict that. I have to cultivate it and make sure you do work on the bit that I'm interested in, but I don't want to destroy the larger creativity. Allow people to pursue their passions. Right? So it's not just about the one thing you do in your life. You've got to have those alternate interests. You've got to be sensible about it. You've got to be an appreciative audience, right? And what I mean by that is when you get a group of academics in the room, and as I said, I can pick 3 professors down here who won't be able to give me the same answer when I say what's the best geopolymer formula. I have to be an appreciative audience. I have to have that patience, which is not easy for me. I assure I'm not a patient man. I have to have that patience to hear each of them out. Even if I've already know what the answer is, you've got to learn those skills of being an appreciative audience. Martin will assure you I haven't learned that skill fully. I'm not good at it, I confess. And then you've got to embrace, and this is a very important one for the undergraduates and the postgraduates sitting back, you've really got to embrace the certainty of failure, right? It never works perfectly, let me tell you. I could tell you stories where I've invested enormous amounts of money in something, only for 6 months in, the whole opportunity to disappear. And it's like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now to solve this situation? Now, I've got 2 choices. I can curl up in fetal position and cry, or I can try and become creative and find a solution. If we had the time, I could share some stories about that, where I have been involved in businesses where we've made significant hundreds of $million investments, and just because of a technology change or a competitor knowing we were about to do it, that opportunity's disappeared and we had to go down a different path. So embracing your failure is important. The best people on this planet have won and have lost, and they've won and they've lost, but each time they've got better at having the odds of winning. But until you've had failure, it's very very difficult to understand how the real world works. And I assure you, through my life, I've been very, very lucky. And inshallah, I'll continue to be. But I've had my failures where I've had to sit back, reflect on life, brush myself off and go, oh my gosh, what did I do wrong? How can I learn from that? What's the better path for me to go down? Hopefully what I've done today, so that kind of finishes the formal slides. I hope today what I've done is just made you sit back and think, right? I didn't come here with solutions because there is no one definitive solution to commercialisation, other than perhaps the message of pick your parties carefully, get involved with the right people, make sure that fit works. So what I hope I've done, whether you're the undergraduate here, the administrator here, or a lecturer here, is just make you have a realisation for how, I guess, the commercialisation side of the fence thinks, right? Right? We need to make sure, I think the best slide there is the one where I've got, you know, the ones with the goals, and, you know, the goals are different. How do we make sure we find that common ground and work together successfully? I've been so brave as to put my phone number there, WhatsApp, WeChat number. I am one of those people that if you do WhatsApp me, if you do WeChat me, or you do email me or write me, I will write back, right? So even if it's to say, give me 3 days, that's an interesting question, I'll get back to you. So I'm being brave enough to put that up there. So please, if you don't want to put your hand up today, but you've got a question, please don't be shy, because I will write back to you. I will get back to you. I will give you a view on what I've said today. What have I got? 1 minute, 2 minutes? That means the questions. The great thing is that means the questions can't be too difficult because we haven't got any time. So I've used my time up. I apologise for speaking non-stop. Actually, I don't. It's just me. So, but I'm not sure if there's a break now or whatever. But please, if there are questions, ask them now, or I'll hang around for a little while afterwards. I do have to go and get a plane, unfortunately, but and go to Jakarta. But if there are questions, grab me, and I'll be more than happy to try and answer them in the best possible way I can. All right. Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you for very important presentation. I will take one question from the audience.
Oh, am I getting questions? I'll put it back on.
One question, because the time is very limited.
And please, Aaron, don't be from you. No, I answered it all too well. Oh, please.
Okay.
Thank you very much for very interesting presentation. Very required with the academic guy and outside.
Yep.
But I have one question about how how can we expand, how can we time frame trees? Because sometimes commercial guy must.
Of course. Yeah.
But at the side technique, where can it we protect the any show to make a valuable product to the world?
Yep.
How would you be the time frame?
Yeah. No. So that is a great question. I don't have control of the slide, so I'll just do it off the top of my head. So there's two parts to my answer. The first is very simple. It's about everyone sitting in the room and working out the priorities and how we get things done. But you are right that finance people are very impatient, right? So it's always about time is money. You're absolutely right. And as I said, it's also about choice. If I think it's going to be too hard, even if I think that's the best idea, but it's too hard, I'll go to the second best idea if it's easier, right? Because it's about making a return on my funds. Having said that, the need for meeting standards, the need for making sure that in a commercialization process, the product that I'm distributing to the marketplace meets a standard is imperative, especially on a new venture, right? You can't afford to let a new venture have a substandard product as its first thing. Years ago, we used to joke about Microsoft. You'd never buy version 1. You'd wait till 1.3 came or 1.4 because all the bugs were gone. So the IT industry was very bad about releasing really beta models, but people had no choice. So if I'm doing something where there's choice, if I'm making cement where people can go and buy traditional cement or buy my cement or our cement, is I've got to make sure that product works perfectly when I release it to the market. So we are aligned. But where we would probably look at it would be, we'll build a demonstration plant, we'll then make a whole lot of this product. So we don't mind that it's 95% perfect from an academic perspective, because what we'll be doing is once we've built that plant is we'll deliberately crush it, break it, and things to make sure it meets a international standard or a building standard or whatever for the cement. And we understand if we're a good partner that it may not work, right? So we understand when we put money into things that there's risk of failure. There's risk that we might never get our money back, right? So the conversations have to be had around not about the time frame for that particular part of the process you're talking about, but what's the time frame of the whole? Because we might say to you, sorry, you do need to go a little faster here, because from a risk perspective, we think we're going to cover it over here. And that just comes down to that ability of us to sit in a room together and have that quality of conversation, and not just be restricted to the micro of that particular point. Because when I produce cement, if I don't produce it to a standard, it doesn't work when you know, we've got the minister standing there next to, you know, the product we've made, we will fail immediately. So our interests are aligned. It's just, where are we recognizing that risk? Where are we recognizing that time frame to be able to make sure we've got success? So yes, we'll ask you to go faster at times, but at other times, we'll probably ask you to go slower. Once that plant's up and running and we want to make sure it works, we'll be going, no, you know, don't, you know, we actually want to slow down and do this again. We want to make 1,000 more before we've got that evidence to say that we're comfortable with it. Because launching new products, if you don't get it right when you first launch it, you'll never recover. It's so hard to come back and say, oh, sorry, we got it wrong. Here's the